Well, Clifford, welcome to New Zealand. Thank you for sparing time.
Thank you for having me.
What are you actually doing here?
You know, I came into Australia to take part in something called the Australian-American Leadership Dialogue. It's been going on for 17, 18 years. This is the first time I've participated. It's various folks from politics, journalism, think tanks who get together once a year, and 1 year is they alternate between someplace in Australia and someplace in the U.S., and did that for about 3 days, and then someone you know, from Colin Rubenstein of AJAC, said, come on, I'm going to take you around to Canberra, to Wellington, to Auckland, meet a lot of people, see a lot of things, so he's worked me very hard over these days.
Well, we'll give you a quarter of an hour's rest. You can at least
Can I take a little nap? Yeah, during the commercial break.
You're down, I mean, your CV is very impressive. You're down as one of the top 100 conservatives in America. And that makes you a very interesting person to talk to because obviously we've just moved from a Republican government in America to a Democrat. Yes. Was America right to go into Iraq? Because that seems to be one of the defining things of the Bush government.
Oh gosh, you're going to open that can of worms again,
absolutely. Are you? I've got no shame.
Let me put it in as brief as I can. At the time that Bush made the decision to go into Iraq, every intelligence agency of any reputation or size in the world, not just the CIA, had come to the conclusion that not only did Saddam have very hostile intentions, there's no question of that, but that he had increasing capabilities, that he had chemical weapons and a stockpile of them, and of course he's somebody who has used chemical weapons in the past against fellow Iraqis. He used them against Kurds, killed thousands of them. That he was working on biological weapons and that he had stockpiles of those. And by the way, there's no question that he has had biological weapons in the past and that he was working very hard on nuclear weapons. And again, in the early 1980s, the Israelis destroyed the Osirak nuclear reactor, which was trying to produce nuclear weapons. And in 1991, the first Gulf War, it was found that he was further along in nuclear development. So there was a consensus on the left, on the right, Democrats and Republicans, and not least at the United Nations, that not only did Saddam have hostile intentions, he was developing these capabilities which he was not permitted to have. The Gulf War in the early 90s ended not with a peace treaty, but with an agreement that he would lay off the Kurds, that he would stop developing weapons of mass destruction. He complied with none of it. So at that point, after 9/11, it seemed it was better to err on the side of caution. Now, I do think that the war was mismanaged badly for a very long time. We didn't know how to fight this kind of war. Our military didn't know how to fight this kind of war. At the end of the day, a new general, General David Petraeus, came in with a very different strategy, and the result is that Americans and Iraqis fighting side by side defeated al-Qaeda on the Iraqi battlefield and defeated the Iranian-backed militias on that battlefield. Those are significant defeats for enemies of America, enemies of New Zealand, enemies of the free world.
And yet,
I'm just sorry you asked me that question.
No. But there have been terrorism outrages just recently. There was 95 people killed in a car bombing in Baghdad.
Yes, and what that tells you is there are still some real bad guys around, and I think our response should not be, let's leave Iraq and the Iraqis to the tender mercies of those sending the suicide bombers. Let's understand there are some very bad people that are fighting Iraqis, fighting Americans, fighting Israelis. We'll fight New Zealanders and Australians by blowing them up in places like Bali. Let's understand we have a serious enemy out there. Now, the thing is that American troops are in the process of leaving Iraq, and the Iraqis are trying to take responsibility for their own defense. They feel they can do it, but it's going to be challenging, and they will be tested and challenged. Even though al-Qaeda was defeated down to the last 10% or so, you can bet al-Qaeda is in a lot of other places in the world. They are infiltrating additional suicide bombers. These suicide bombers are not Iraqis, almost not at all. And they're sending them in to kill people, and if they can stir up another civil war, they will do it. That's the nature of this enemy. It is our enemy equally.
Just down the road is Afghanistan, of course.
And just down the road is Afghanistan. And my point there is Afghanistan and Iraq are not two separate wars. They are two separate fronts in the same war that we are fighting. We're fighting al-Qaeda and we're fighting the Taliban. Their ideologies are not really distinguishable any more than the ideologies of Hezbollah and Hamas. We can talk about the differences, but what you have is a movement inside of the Muslim world not all Muslims, a movement inside the Muslim world that seeks the destruction of free nations, of the West, of the Judeo-Christian empire, as they call it, the Crusaders and Zionists, as they also call it. They are waging war against us. They say, look, Islam was once a winner's religion. We once dominated the world. We broke out of Arabia, the Muslims did, in the 7th century. In a heartbeat, we had an empire that stretched from Spain to the Pacific and deep into Europe to the gates of Vienna. We can have all that again, and we deserve to have all that again, and we will if we will only fight for it, because the Christians and the Jews are weak. We have already brought down the communists. Now we can bring down the other infidel empire, and all this will be ours as it should be ours. We deserve it. It is what Allah wants. I'm not making this up. I'm not analyzing it. I can show you chapter and verse where they all are saying exactly this. They write it down. They're not shy about it. They're absolutely candid. We refuse to listen to them. We say, no, they can't possibly mean that. They must have a grievance that needs to be addressed. I'm sure we can make some concession and they'll like us better. No, it's not going to work like that. Get it through your head.
So we put an election in place. We try and impose a Western-style democracy on what's essentially a feudal society. Surely then we're hiding to nothing.
I don't think we should do that. If that's what we're doing, we're making a mistake. I don't think that is what we did in, say, Anbar province of Iraq, and I don't think it's at all what we should be doing in Afghanistan. Our goal in these places is primarily the defeat of al-Qaeda and the defeat of other militant Islamist groups, the Taliban. That's our primary goal. Now, to do that is not so easy and takes other things. So that, for example, and this is very much what counterinsurgency under Petraeus looks like, you need to go in and you want to establish relations with the traditional structure, the traditional leaders, the sheikh, the local imam, those sorts of folks, and you want to ask them, not tell them, do you need some help protecting yourself from the Taliban? If they say no, walk out, there's someplace else to go. If they say yes, we can't defend ourselves on our own. So help us to clear out the bad guys. Often they're not even Afghans. They're Chechens, they're Arabs, they're from the Pakistanis, they're from somewhere else. And then teach us how to defend ourselves. And by the way, if you can, we could use a little economic development here. We don't have enough jobs, and that can mean that if the Taliban comes in and pays somebody $100, they'll plant an IED. It would help us. That's what they're doing. I was in Afghanistan in November. I was meeting with the top generals there. It was very interesting as they talked to me about irrigation systems, and as they talked to me about having cups of tea with the local sheikh. And I said, when you went to West Point, did you think you were going to be an agricultural development expert and an anthropologist? Didn't you think you were going to take your gun and shoot people and break things? And I said, yes, I did, but I can't fight the wars of the past. I have to fight the wars of the present. So we're not trying to make Afghanistan into New Zealand or Costa Rica. We are trying to make it into a society that can defend itself against extremist enemies that the Afghan people do not like. When the Taliban says you can't vote, why is it you think they're saying you can't vote? Because they don't like who they're going to vote for, and we're going to kill you. When I was in Afghanistan, little girls had, and this is quite serious, had acid thrown in their face. Why? What was the crime they had committed? They were walking to school. Yes, we can say, well, that's none of our business. It's too bad if that's how we're not going to have anything to do with it. Is that the moral response from our point of view? It's not the self-enlightened response, because we know that when the Taliban is established, they will host al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda, if we let them, will plan 100 9/11s, 1,000 times worse, if they can do it. So I would argue that what we want to do is help these folks to have a decent life and to live their own way. The Taliban came in, they banned not only TV and radio and music and soccer games. Not only did they use the stadiums for amputations of people who they considered insufficiently Islamic, they even banned kite flying. They even banned that. They wouldn't even let them do that.
We'll take a break, come back and chat some more. Back in a moment.